Good morning, everybody. Bill Hogarth here, Southend Evangelical Church, carrying on with our sermon series in Joseph. And today we are in Genesis chapter 37, from verse 3 through to 24. I'll just give you the reading. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colours. But his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers again, and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." He said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now he found a certain man. Now a certain man found him, and he was there wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" He said, "I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him from far off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into this pit. And we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what shall become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, "Let's not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colours that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more. Where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the tunic of many colours to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it, said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So Joseph is 17 years old. He's a bright, handsome young man. His prospects are great. He's about to learn a hard lesson in life, that life can kick you in the teeth, and not just that, but when you go down, life can keep on kicking you. And sadly, quite often, it's the people that are closest to you that do the most kicking. His own brothers are the ones that are going to be putting on Joseph. He's blindsided by people that he thought he knew. Out of my own personal experience, I can tell you that that can make you bitter. It can even make you hate your family. But Joseph somehow avoided becoming like his brothers. He never built that emotional stronghold that they had of bitterness. He faced hurt, he faced trauma, slavery, prison. His dreams seemed to have been crushed, but he never became bitter. All his brothers, apart from Benjamin, have a different story to tell. They started out being jealous of Joseph, and that led to bitterness. Ephesians 4:31 says, "Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamour, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice." Why? Well, because the word bitter means something poisonous that will kill anyone or anything that possesses it. We talk of a bitter root going into people's hearts because of past hurts. Nola and I have seen many people with bitter roots that if they're not pulled out spiritually, that person will become so bound up in bitterness it will eat up their lives and rob them of God's plan for them. And biblically, bitterness is anger that has seethed until it hardens into a rebellious, vengeful conclusion. It's a bit like when you make chili. When I make chili, I like it to be thick, almost solid. And that's what happens to anger that has seethed on a low light until it's just simmered and it's just hardened. An unforgiving spirit lets anger take hold. Anger over circumstances, anger at your spouse, anger at your children, your pastor, your employer, your friend. You can fill in the blanks for yourself. Anger is embraced and coddled and rehearsed, all the while quietly taking over your life. You feel entitled to hate someone. You feel justified to desire somebody's ruin, and energized actually to seek their downfall. See, jealousy is the primary fuel that lights this bonfire in Joseph's brothers, because they're jealous of his relationship, because Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was a son of his old age. And verse 3 says that when his brothers saw their father loved him more, they hated him and couldn't speak peacefully to him. Joseph is Jacob's favourite, and there are several things that contribute to this. First of all, Joseph was Rachel's firstborn, and Rachel, as we know from the story of Rachel and Leah and Laban, Rachel was Jacob's favourite wife. She died about a year before, so it's natural then that Jacob would transfer his affection to his son, to their son. And verse 3 reports that Joseph was born late in Jacob's life, giving this old man a special joy. Rightly or wrongly, Jacob made Joseph his favourite. He loved him in a way he didn't love his other sons. And guess what? They hated him because of it. We have 5 grandchildren and we love them all, of course. The youngest can't talk yet, but the others will sometimes come to one of us and whisper, "Who's your favourite?" My answer is always the same. It's the one I'm with right now. The brothers were jealous of Joseph's position. Every child who goes to Sunday school long enough will eventually hear the story of Joseph and the coat of many colours. And we all know it's been a West End musical as well, with one of the most confusing lines in musical history. I closed my eyes, drew back the curtains so I could see what I could see. I still don't understand it. 20 years I've been puzzling over that one. But you know, there's a backstory to this fancy tunic that we need to understand. Back in Genesis 35 and verse 22, we see Reuben, the oldest son, who commits a serious sin by going and sleeping with Bilhah, who is a concubine of his father's. And because of his immorality, he lost not only his father's favour, but also his position as an heir. the one who would inherit the birthright. And Genesis is very clear that Jacob used his position as a leader of the family to make Joseph, his first son by Rachel, his heir instead of Reuben. One of the symbols of the birthright was a special tunic or coat. The Hebrew words of verse 3 tell us this coat was richly decorated, but more importantly it tells us that this was a long coat. The sleeves were long and it fell down to the ankles, and I can hear you thinking, okay, what does that mean? A long-sleeved tailored coat was usually worn by the manager, somebody in authority, someone who did no actual physical work but was overseer to the others. You know, the guy who walks around with the clipboard and a cup of coffee, not really doing much but making sure that everybody else is slaving away as hard as they can. And now we see why the brothers hated Joseph. Each of them, apart from Reuben, because of his sin, felt that they could have had the coat, maybe should have had the coat. After all, they're older, they're wiser, they're stronger, and that coat is a visible reminder that Jacob dismissed all of them in favour of Joseph. Many years ago, over 20 years ago now, we were in an Elim church in mid-Wales, and a new pastor came in fresh from Bible college, and as new pastors are often inclined to do, decided that what they had in place there wasn't good enough, and so he would remove everybody from their positions and he would do everything on his own because he was the only one who knew the right way of doing things. This pastor, by the way, is a long-standing friend of ours. We're on very good terms with him, and he won't mind me saying this. In fact, he'd probably just laugh at it because he knows the truth. Most of the people who'd been deacons or elders, they just sat back and they waited for the penny to drop. But there was one who'd been a deacon, and he felt he couldn't stay, so he left. And fast forward 10 years, 20 years if you like, because we quite often bump into him when we go back to Wales to see our daughter. We bumped into this ex-deacon in a cafe, and this was the first time was probably 10 years after we'd left. And the first thing he said, I should never have lost my place as a deacon. That man didn't know what he was doing. I was a good deacon. 10 years have gone by and he's still bitter about it. If you're feeling ticked off because somebody got your promotion or you didn't get on the leadership team at church or somewhere else, just be careful because bitterness is just around the corner. And the brothers are jealous of God's favour as well. Now Joseph had a dream. We know this, that they're all in the field, they're binding sheaves, and suddenly Joseph's sheaf stands up and all the other sheaves bow to it. You don't have to be Einstein to figure out what this dream is saying, do you? That Joseph one day is going to be in charge, in control. And actually, because Jacob has transferred the birthright to him, one day he will be. And then he has a second dream, this time with different symbols, the sun, the moon and the stars, but with the same meaning because everything is bowing down to Joseph. His father heard it, thought it was a joke, but it does say that he kept the saying in mind. Now here's the point. If your little brother comes up to you and tells you about a crazy dream he has, you might poke fun at him or you might ignore him, but you don't get jealous of him unless you really believe that God is speaking to him. You see, the brothers really believed that one day that dream of Joseph's will come true. Sometimes, we can feel as if somebody has a hotline with God that we're missing, and they're the ones that people turn to for counsel or flock to if they're preaching or teaching a class. And inside you, there's a quiet desire to see a huge wrecking ball come and knock them off their pedestal. Joseph's brothers, for them, self-pity and jealousy and anger finally pushed them over a dangerous line. They were mad at their father for his favoritism. Joseph actually hasn't done anything wrong. They're mad at God for the good things that were coming to their brother and not to them. And there was only one way for them to get back. They would take away the darling object of affection. So following his father's request, because in the Amplified Bible we have Jacob asking Joseph if he would go and search for his brothers. So Joseph tracked down his brothers, and it took him about 5 days to finally find them. And they conspired to kill him. They saw him coming and said, "Here he comes. Come on, we'll kill him. We'll throw him into one of the pits, and we'll say that some fierce animal has eaten him." But Reuben intervenes, convinces his brothers not to murder Joseph, but to throw him into an abandoned well. My theory is that Reuben sees a chance to get back into his father's good books and get his place back that he lost when he slept with Bilhah. So Joseph's innocently walking along. It says much about Joseph that he would just go alone to his brothers. He must have known how much they violently disliked him. We're told they always spoke harshly to him, and now the dreams can only have made things worse. They let him get close enough, and then they jump on him, they strip the robe off him, and they throw him into a dry well. And now there's no turning back. They let nature take its course. They can tell each other that they're not directly guilty for what happens to Joseph. They can shift the blame onto Jacob for his favoritism, or they can blame a lion or wild animal, but not themselves. They weren't responsible once he was in the pit. You see, in verse 25, they sat down to eat. Now, this chapter of Genesis says nothing about Joseph complaining or asking for help. But in Genesis 42 and verse 2, we have the brothers remembering the moment that they threw Joseph in the pit and confessing, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen." It says Joseph is crying out in pain and terror. 10 men, all of them his brothers, are calmly sat around the fire, eating dinner, hearing him scream for help and laughing. And the normal dinner time conversation is going on. "Pass the lamb, where's the bread? Who's got the wine? Pass it back here, we haven't had any yet." And they're oblivious to his pain. They're thinking only of the revenge they had on Joseph. How hard can a man's heart be to listen to your own brother begging for mercy? And suddenly, their revenge becomes all the more sweet, because along comes a slave trader. Why kill him when they could make a nice profit from him? And they had a chance to be rid of him for once and for all, and so they sold him into slavery. And when they get home, their story's all laid out. They have the tunic there, they've slashed it up and ripped it, and killed a goat and smeared blood all over it, and they're leaving Jacob heartbroken to think that his favourite son, the firstborn of his beloved Rachel, is now dead. Bitterness and jealousy took any trace of brotherly love out of those brothers and led them to sell Joseph into slavery and lie to their father. What can we learn? Bitterness is really being angry at God. If God is ultimately in control of every circumstance that comes into our lives, then who am I really angry with when I rail against a situation or a person? Deep down, although I don't usually realise it, I'm mad at God. I'm mad at him for what he's allowed, for what he's done, or mainly for what he's not done. Bitterness means that you've abandoned Romans 8, verse 28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. See, we can give up on the providential goodness of God. If you're bitter at someone this morning, you've decided that God didn't handle that rightly, so you will now take over. You've decided to overrule the events of your life. And that bitterness leaks out. Hebrews 12 gives us a warning. It says, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled." Bitter roots cause trouble for and defile other people. Bitter people, at the very least, will disrupt and unnecessarily trouble others. Or in the worst possible effect, bitter people will corrupt others. Joseph was clearly his father's favourite son. He walked with God, and God communicated to him something of his future. And all this drove Joseph's brothers over the edge. But was the favouritism Joseph's fault? No, it was Jacob's lack of wisdom. Were the dreams Joseph's fault? Of course not. So why was Joseph the target of their hatred? Because Jacob was their father and they needed him, and they knew they couldn't fight against God, so they picked the best next target. Years ago I learned that sometimes the venom people vent on you is not really about you. You're just a convenient target. Remembering that can help you. So when someone's anger doesn't make sense, you can pray for them and return good for evil. Thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope it's blessed you in some way. As usual, I will say stay safe and be blessed. Amen.